Can people online hear us as well now? Perfect. So today's topic is titled Deconstructing Israel's Narrative on Human Seals to Justify Violence Against Palestinians. And as you probably have heard, the human seals is a very known issue in the context of different military operation, and human seals are seals of humans used to legitimate military target, used to protect military target in order to deter the enemy from attacking certain critical military infrastructure or yes. So in the context of the Israeli occupation in Palestine, this narrative is very often encountered. And today we have two experts that are going to talk about this human seal narrative from different perspectives. So our first presenter is Coline Proy, who is an international lawyer, graduate from Lund University, and currently a guest researcher at the Faculty of Law at UIT. She has previously worked at different NGOs in the field of human rights, mainly in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and worked also for an organization investigating war crimes during the civil war in Sri Lanka. Her master thesis is entitled The Classification of Civilians as Human Seals and Means to Justify Violence. And talking about human seals, this human seal narrative is also used in order to legitimize attacks in critical health infrastructures such as hospitals. And in that regard, we have a second expertise today with us, probably known to most of you, but Matt Gilbert is a professor emeritus specialized in emergency medicine and medical doctor specialized in anesthesiology. He has written 2 books where he presents eyewitness accounts from Gaza under siege and attack in 2009 and 2014, respectively. He will talk about how Israel uses this narrative to currently attack hospitals in occupied Palestinian territories. I would like to mention that the 2 presentations will be approximately 20 minutes each, followed up with about half an hour of Q&A and discussion session. In addition, this event will be recorded for those that they could not manage to be with us today. However, you can in case someone wants to participate subsequently and in the Q&A and does not want their voice to be recorded, you can always log in online and send the question to our colleague Sophie, who is in charge of the Q&A online session. So with that, I would like to introduce Coline, our first speaker, to the floor.
Hello, can everybody hear properly online as well? So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for being here. So human shields have been increasingly documented in contemporary armed conflicts. More precisely, as Apostolos mentioned, it has been used as a justification for the deaths of civilians and to shift the blames for those deaths on the enemy. So this has been the case during various phases of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, including the last few months. So this narrative is problematic in several ways. It simplifies and omits several dispositions of the law. So in this presentation, first I will go back to the legal framework surrounding human shields and the obligations of attackers facing alleged human shields. So I will then look at the narratives of Israel surrounding human shields in the last 2 decades, but I will not cover the last few months as I haven't researched that yet. So first, we need to go to check the definition of human shield, if it works. So human shields are civilian or other protected persons in international law, such as medics, who are used to safeguard military objectives during armed conflicts. So just a reminder that civilians and other protected persons are protected against harm during armed conflicts. On the contrary, military objectives are considered legitimate and legal targets. So by placing civilians in the way, combatants seek to prevent their adversary from attacking those military targets. So the prerequisite, as you can see, to be considered human shields is to be a civilian in the first place. But apart from that, human shields as such are not defined by the law. The law only establishes the prohibition to force someone to act as human shield, which is a war crime according to the International Criminal Court statute. So despite that, we can deduct from the law that one key aspect is necessary, and this is the intent of a party to use civilians as human shields. Without the intent to use someone as a shield, there is no crime of human shielding, and combatant fighting close to civilians can be considered as endangering those civilians, but not as using them as human shield if there is no intent. So in the absence of a proper definition of human shield, three categories have emerged in recent discourses. First, involuntary human shields, meaning civilians used as human shields involuntarily, which is the war crime that I mentioned just before. There are also voluntary human shields, so civilians who would position themselves as human shields willingly. And on that, there is a debate whether they participate directly in the hostilities, but I will explain that later. And finally, there is the category of proximate shields, that is civilians who are classified as human shields just by being near a military target. So within those categories, two do not necessarily match the terms of the war crime of human shielding. That is the case of voluntary human shields, if no other party is involved in using them as human shields. And it is the case of proximate shields or human shields by proximity. Again, as I just mentioned, there is no crime of human shielding if there is no intent to use civilians as human shields. So if civilians are next to a military target by coincidence, it does not make them human shields. This is very important to underline, as most of the civilians reported as human shields in contemporary armed conflicts are human shields by proximity, so not human shields by law. So the first issue with such narrative on human shield is that there is a tendency to extend the classification of human shields to civilians close to conflict zones. This is problematic in the context of urban armed conflicts or any conflicts that happens in densely populated areas such as Gaza. In these cases, the classification of proximate shields would be extended to a huge number of people that are not legally human shields. So then we need to look at the obligations of the attacker facing alleged human shields. So even if a party actually faces human shields, it does not mean that the death of the human shields will be the sole responsibility of the adversary. So first, in order to know what the obligations of the attacking party are, we need to understand what the status of human shields is. So the scholarship is not unanimous on the matter, but it is generally agreed on that human shields retain their status as civilians as long as they do not directly participate in the hostilities. So those classified as voluntary human shields would not meet this threshold of directly participating in hostilities. They should still be considered civilians. But for voluntary human shields, it is more debated. So each case should be considered individually, depending, for example, on what type of object is being shielded. So furthermore, regardless of whether they are considered civilians or not, one of the key principles when planning an attack is the presumption of civilian status. So when an attacking party is in doubt on the status of the potential victim of its attacks, it needs to consider them as civilians, even if they are not. Then the other key rules which applies to civilians is precautions in attack. It offers a list of precautionary measures what should take to avoid causing civilian death, such as, for example, choosing a target of similar strategic value that would not harm civilians or giving warning to civilians before attacking. So if after taking all these feasible precautions, you determine that your attack would cause civilian harm, you should then apply the principle of proportionality, which is part of the precautions in attack. This principle establishes that the harm to civilians should not be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. So it means that civilian harm is legal as long as it is proportional to this direct military advantage anticipated. This principle is criticized for having a certain degree of subjectivity in what could be proportional or not mainly with the terms of anticipated or expected harm, which can be very subjective. So this principle can easily be instrumentalized to justify civilian death, including human shields. For example, some have argued that the proportionality test is considerably affected when facing civilians used as human shields. So to sum up, even if a party faces alleged human shields, the above obligations apply. As such, human shields cannot be used as a simple justification for the death of civilians. Even if human shields are indeed being used, it doesn't mean that a party is abiding by the law when killing them. Furthermore, determining someone's intent to use civilians as shields in the field during an armed conflict can be tricky. So it is doubtful that one can always determine with certainty that one faces human shield or just lambda civilians. So now we can look precisely at the case of Israel. So Israel clearly distinguishes between voluntary and involuntary human shields. Already in 2006, the Israeli Supreme Court considered in the targeted killings case that voluntary human shields are to be seen as directly participating in the hostilities. Again, this does not appear in international law and should be determined individually based on the threshold of direct participation to hostilities. This means that for the Israeli Supreme Court, voluntary human shields can be targeted as any combatant as long as they act as shields. On the contrary, the court considered that involuntary human shields retain their status as civilians. And as will be shown, they are depicted as victims of terrorists by Israel, as opposed to voluntary human shields who are seen as siding with terrorists. So following this logic, involuntary human shields should be protected as opposed to voluntary ones. But in all the cases that we will study, the human shield narrative was used to justify the death of civilians classified as human shield, whether they are voluntary or involuntary. So now we will look specifically at voluntary human shields and at Corey's case. So this case is the only one in the Israeli jurisprudence involving someone classified as human shield who was killed in an operation. So although this happened in Palestine, this case involved an American woman. There is no court case involving any Palestinians classified as human shields who were killed, although obviously this classification is almost entirely applied to them by Israel. So Rachel Corey was an American student working on a senior year project in the Gaza Strip. With other activists, she protested the mass demolition of Palestinian homes at the border with Egypt. So on 16 March 2003, she was run over to death by a military bulldozer in her attempt to prevent the destruction of the house of a local pharmacist. So Corey's death was ruled out as an accident in a civil suit at an Israeli district court and then subsequently by the Supreme Court of Israel. So neither the bulldozer operator or the state were held responsible. So despite considering that the event happened during wartime activity and that the bulldozer was taking part into this wartime activity, the court refused to apply international law and only applied domestic law on civil wrongs, stating that it overrides international law. So while refusing to acknowledge the law applicable to armed conflicts, the classification of voluntary human shield was used to justify the death of Corey. So Corey was depicted as responsible for her own death and as a violent terrorist for her history of peace activism by the defense. She was even accused of taking advantage of her position as a foreigner and of being willing to die to create a more significant international outcry. So the defense itself recognized that if she had been a Palestinian, her case would not have been known. So in the meantime, the rules of fair trial were not respected. No Palestinian witnesses were ever called to the court, and foreign witnesses were allegedly threatened. So as you can see on the pictures of the PowerPoint, we can see Corey on the day she was killed. wearing a fluorescent orange safety vest and holding a megaphone. Apart from the bulldozer, no combatants or military objects are visible. So out of context, these images do not suggest that the events take place in the circumstances of an armed conflict. Instead, Cory looks like a protester standing there to protest the demolition campaign. Her clothes and megaphone also suggest that she wanted to be noticeable and take precautions. As such, we can see the contradictions in this case involving a vocabulary related to armed conflicts such as wartime activities or human shields, but at the same time, the law applicable to armed conflicts was not used, and it involves a bulldozer and not a tank. It also questions the value given to life if a destroyed, empty house is more valuable than a human being in an operation that does not appear to be breathing. This case shows that classifying peaceful protesters as voluntary human shields put them in very dangerous positions, specifically in Gaza, where everything can be understood from the lens of an armed conflict. Any form of resistance or protest could be framed as shield or terrorism, and as such, deliberately targeted. So now we can look at involuntary human shields. So the history of Israel using this narrative is not limited to Palestine. One of the first times it was used to justify civilian deaths was during the war with Lebanon in 2006. It was investigated by the Commission of Inquiry on Lebanon from the Human Rights Council and by Human Rights Watch. Israel held Hezbollah responsible for civilian deaths in densely populated areas because of their alleged use of human shields. But the report highlighted Israel's unwillingness to distinguish the prohibition against the crime of human shielding from the fact that I just mentioned at the beginning of endangering the civilian population by failing to take all feasible precautions to minimize civilian harm, which is not a war crime. This reminds us that a key element in determining the crime of human shielding is the intent to use human shields. The fact of endangering civilians by fighting near them, but without the intent of using them as human shields, is not enough to constitute the crime of human shielding, and this brings us back to the category of proximate shields, which does not exist legally. So the failure of Israel to distinguish the crime of human shielding and the act of endangering civilians has multiplied with various attacks in Gaza over the last 2 decades. It is especially problematic as the density of Gaza implies that military activities will happen close to civilians. By omitting the intent of using human shields in the crime of human shielding, a huge number of civilians could then be classified as such. More precisely, over the last 2 decades, Israel has claimed to be engaged in a war on terror against Palestinian armed groups. Israel maintained that those groups found inspiration in Hezbollah's methods, specifically in using human shields. The systematicity of these allegations to justify the deaths of civilians who died in attacks launched in very densely populated areas can, of course, make us question their validity, like in Lebanon. In their majority, these allegations again come into the category of proximate human shields, and as such, those acts would only constitute endangerment of civilians, whereas Israel's attack can be considered as deliberate, indiscriminate attacks against civilians, which is a war crime according to the ICC statute. And even if human shields were being used in some cases, as we have seen, several rules still apply when launching an attack. So to this argument, Israel has repeatedly replied that the casualties were proportional, omitting the other rules of precautions that in attack that apply before that. But even the proportionality aspect of this attack is disputable. So you can look at the PowerPoint and you can see several pictures from a COM operation that has been launched in Israel since 2010 related to human shields in Gaza to justify civilian deaths. So as you can see, this communication campaign appears to be based on several key aspects. The demonization of the opponents, the idea that civilian infrastructures become military targets when used by Hamas for military activities, the idea that Israel and Palestine are also on an equal footing. This also appears to mean that the supposed presence of weapon overrides the presence of civilian or the initial function of the home. It then becomes more important to destroy a weapon supply rather than to spare the house and its inhabitants. From a proportionality perspective, it can appear as excessive, like in Cora's case. So furthermore, this reinforces the idea that in Gaza, no house is safeguarded from being a target. This almost transforms every facility, civilian facility, into something suspect and potentially the whole Gaza Strip. This human shields narrative serves a double purpose, dehumanizing civilians and presenting them as targetable objects while demonizing the opponent by depicting them as terrorists using civilians as human shields. This communication strategy is part of a general, anticipated legal defense to justify civilian death before the attack has even occurred. This calculated strategy is very worrying, as civilian deaths should not be accepted and planned beforehand, but should be avoided and come at a last resort and after following a very specific set of rules in international law. So in conclusion, we can see that the narrative of human shields as used by Israel is very questionable from a legal perspective. Worryingly, however, this narrative is no longer just used to justify civilian death after an attack, which is already problematic. The narrative now precedes the attack and shapes actions in the field, allowing the use of violence against civilians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Coline, for this wonderful presentation. I encourage the audience to write down your comments or questions for the session afterwards, as we will continue now with the following presentation from Professor Gilbert. Please.
Hallo, yes. Assalamu alaikum. God ettermiddag, Bori Baby. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for the initiative. I think this university really needs a little poke up the ass to get going when it comes to international solidarity. It's far too passive, and I think it's quite a bit of a shame that Tromsø city, who is praising itself for being the twin city of Gaza City for the last 20 years, does not have a university which is more active and more pronounced and more outspoken when it comes to international solidarity and the situation in Gaza. So really, thank you to the foreign students and the Palestinian students for this very important initiative. Are we good, brother? So my disclaimer, since I am speaking in the university, is that I am a member of the Palestine Committee. I've been that for 40 years, and I have been on multiple missions to Gaza to work for the healthcare system for different organizations, in particular for my hospital, my university hospital down the street here, which sends me on these missions to work in the Palestinian healthcare system, for which I'm very grateful. So my university hospital has always been an international solidarity hospital. I've also been working in Tamil Eelam with medical training there, by the way, with the Tamil Tigers. So I don't mind being on the side of the oppressed. Actually, that's my very deliberate choice. And I have big problems in accepting the term terrorists. In my view, what is going on in Gaza is a very glaring example of this abuse of language, of this turning terms into something to defend war crimes. To me, Israel is a terror state, and what is going on in Gaza is state terrorism. And I think the Palestinian people have the right to defend themselves according to international law, even with weapons. I don't support Hamas, I don't support Fatah or jihad or any other organization or political party or armed faction in Palestine, but I support the Palestinian people and their right to engage in armed resistance against an illegal occupation, just like the Ukrainian people is doing. So I'm very clear on that. Of course, everything has to be within the framework of international law. Let me see. So this is the title I've been given, and I will try to cover that in a quick 20 minutes. Some pictures here that you see, I will come back to them. I have been actively trying to get into Gaza. Again, now I've been working with the Palestinians since 1981. First mission was in Beirut with during the bombing of Beirut in 81, and I was there in 82. So I have a long experience with also the Israeli way, modus operandi, when it comes to attacking Palestinian healthcare. But I'll concentrate on the situation now in Gaza. But this is not something that started on the 7th of October. This is a long story of illegal occupation, of colonization, of brutal attacks on unoccupied people, and on the abuse of power. And one of the main problems, in my opinion, is the Israeli impunity, that they have never, ever, until now, thanks to the Republic of South Africa, they have never been held accountable according to international law. And I think that's part of the reason why we see these massive abuses of power going unrestrained by EU, by Western governments, and by the US. So first of all, I want to congratulate Coline for this eminent master thesis, a very important piece of work. Thank you so much. I think we should give her an applause. She didn't get an applause. I really think so. This is an active academic choosing a subject and working hard to investigate, to elaborate, and to find out about this very important topic on the use of human shields. And I think her concluding slide was very clarifying. So this is my topic. It is how the Israeli army, the Israeli occupation forces, are systematically attacking Palestinian healthcare under the pretext that they are shielding some sort of not documented, not proven military activities. And I think she gave very good sort of the legal framework. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a medical doctor, but I know from my own experience through 25 years of working with Palestinian healthcare in Gaza that the Israelis are constantly attacking healthcare. They don't even need to validate that by saying it is a military position in the hospital, or that the doctors, the nurses, the patients are used as human shields. This is from the last attack on Nasser Medical Complex just a week ago, and I'll come back to that. So this is just a modification. Human shields are civilians or other protected persons being used by combatants to safeguard military objectives during an armed conflict. So it's an active use of civilians. And they are presented as expandable just for being close to military objectives. So this can be used either way. I think the core problem we need to discuss is actually, do the Palestinian people have the right to resist occupation? And do you have the right to resist occupation as a teacher, as an ambulance paramedic, as a medical doctor without arms? Is the popular resistance more like a broad-based resistance where you don't have to have an arm to be part of the resistance? And that's the way I understand and I experience Gaza. In many ways, the same way that the Norwegian resistance was working during the 40-45 occupation by the German army, where everybody took part if they were not on the German side, which the majority were not. And we were called terrorists by the Germans. So just a little peek back to why did we get international law? It was an attempt to limit the savagery of warfare, to make it more, I don't want to use the word human, but to try to build on what came during the Age of Enlightenment, that we have a humanity, we have human rights. It didn't come then, it came later, but we have a duty to protect life. And in warfare, you want to overcome another state, but that should be done by disabling the combatants of that state and not the people of that state. So this important distinction between combatants and civilians was sort of presented as obligatory, as a pillar of modern humanitarian law. And what we're seeing as we are sitting here, what we are seeing in Gaza and in the West Bank is a total disregard for any international law or treaty. The Declaration of Human Rights, the rights of children, all of these declarations seems to be invalidated in Gaza, as we shall see from the numbers and from the types of attacks. So this is one of the protected items in an armed conflict. This is the Ahmad Yassin Mosque in Shati, which is one of the biggest refugee camps in Gaza that I know very well, a beautiful mosque. This is one of the 217 mosques that Israeli attacks has demolished and destroyed, in addition to 3 churches. And the houses of God are clearly protected civilian objects. There's been no proof that these almost 300 houses of God have been in any way been military targets. So the Israeli military disregard for international humanitarian law in occupied Palestine territory, OPT, occupied Palestinian territory, is not new. It's extremely well documented, but it's never punished. And I'll quickly scan through a few of these elements. The siege, which is collective punishment, the siege of Gaza, which has now been on for 17 years, and also the siege of villages and habitats in the West Bank, the systematic armed attacks on civilians, and the systematic armed attacks on civilian infrastructure, which is also protected according to international law. The educational part, the schools, public schools, universities, high schools, all universities in Gaza are now bombed. I've been a guest professor at Al-Azhar University for many years, where I teach medical students. It's completely demolished. Healthcare, we'll come back to that. Don't forget the primary healthcare. Order, police, it says an error there, police stations and forces, which are very important to maintain public order. And we see that now when they do the airdrops, that it's a complete chaos because the whole civilian infrastructure and order has been demolished. Daily needs, water, sewage, roads, power supplies, all bombed, and the food basket, farming, also not much talked about, farming, fisheries, poultries, bakeries, and mills bombed systematically, so to starve the people. And then they are the ones actively using Palestinians as human shields. And I brought with me, I just forgot to take it, thank you, the Goldstone report. You know the Goldstone report? It is the sum-up report of the investigation that UN organized in 2009, after the 2009 attack. And it's a very comprehensive report, and there is one single chapter only on the Israeli army's use of Palestinian civilians to attack and to be human shields for the armed forces when they did, search and attacks inside. So who is it that really is using human shields? It's the Israeli army. They do it in the West Bank. We've seen now recently, last few months, they're doing it systematically. They're even tying people to their jeeps when they move into the villages. And it's well documented through all the recent attacks on Gaza, 2006, 9, 12, 14, 21, and now that Israelis are actually using Palestinians as human shields while they're doing their military operations. And there is no freedom of movement. This is a complete apartheid system, which by itself is forbidden by international law. So I think we again and again see this irony, this situation where the thief is shouting, "Stop the thief," because the breaches of international law clearly are overwhelmingly on the Israeli side. We're academics, as some of my sources, I've listed them here, some of the many international sources and the Ministry of Health in Gaza. These are the sources I use every day. Palestine Red Crescent Society, PRCS, and of course the OCHA, WHO, and UNICEF reports. And then there are good media resources, not so much the mainstream media in Norway on the West, but you have the one I've listed here. And of course, there is research. And we have published a lot of research from Gaza in Lancet, in British Medical Journal, on the consequences of the Israeli attacks. This is the flash update that comes every second day, and it's now more than 140 of them. And they have a one-pager, which I urge you to subscribe to. It comes every second day, and it has all the numbers, and it's issued by OCHA. Come back to that, and then you have specific documentation like this one from WHO on the impact of health attacks in the Gaza Strip, and you have separate sort of subject reports on, for example, attacks on healthcare. So this is the last one that came the 6th of March, day 151. So every detail of this attack is documented, and to be read by all Minister of Foreign Affairs, by all political decision makers, and I've just cut out some parts of it. This is from this last report on the 6th of March, and you see the number of killed Palestinians. It's been increasing day by day, and here you see the number of injured Palestinians. The number of killed Israelis stands at 1,200, including 33 children. Of course, no Israeli civilians should be killed in an armed conflict. Absolutely none. And the Palestinians should be investigated if they are breaching international law. But so should also Israel. And the magnitude of the killing on the two sides is absolutely out of any proportion, which is part of the international law requirement, that is proportionality. So first, a little bit about the siege and the attacks on Palestinian infrastructure. This is one of the craters in Gaza now in February from a 1-ton American bomb dropped in an apartment residential area. But the siege is very well documented. The siege has been going on since 2007. And there's a lot of research on the consequences of the siege. This one is 14 years old. It's from the European Journal of Public Health. Living condition under the siege imposed on the Gaza Strip continues to be a major cause of suffering, and it prevents the Gazans from crucial needs being fulfilled. And it concludes also that the main reported cause of suffering of Gazans is the Israeli-imposed siege, followed by the effects of the Israeli attacks on the Strip 14 years ago. Nothing has happened from the West. Nothing has happened to try to control and limit the abuse of power by the Israeli army supported by the US. That's why we see what's going on now. And I think, in my opinion, that's why Israel is completely unstoppable, even by lip service from the White House. Until they stop supplying bombs and money to the occupying forces, they will continue and kill Palestinians with full disregard of international law. This report came now in February. It's a very important report from the Global Nutrition Cluster, and it concludes that there is a massive threat of starvation and starvation death in Gaza. We have known this for 3 months now, because it went from a partial siege to a complete siege on the 7th of October. There's been a complete stop in all the water pipelines going to Gaza, electricity, food supplies, medical supplies. As you know, thousands of trucks are standing in El Arish and in Rafah waiting to get in, and they do these ridiculous and almost sickening airdrops. The airdrop that has been provided so far, the content of aid could fit into 2 trailers, and there are 2,000 about trailers standing waiting to get in, not let in by the Israelis because they don't want the people to have food and water, simply because they want this collective punishment. And as they have said, we consider everyone in Gaza a target and a supporter of Hamas and the resistance. Maybe there are supporters of the resistance, but they're definitely not supporters of Hamas. But in the context of human shields, they have already defined, I think the government has already defined everyone in Gaza as a target, in particular the fascists of the government. This is Mama Anwar, who lost her child, Mila, to starvation a few days ago. And don't forget that the International Court of Justice, when they decided to open investigation on war crimes, they also said that Israel has to stop the killing and they must ensure the delivery of basic services and essential humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. They have done exactly the opposite. They have continued the killing. I think they've killed more than 1,500 since this verdict, and they are still blocking for any help. And on March 6th, a few days ago, I got this report from my good friend, the Minister of Health, Dr. Youssef Abarish. 18 people so far died from starvation only in Shifa hospitals. I can tell you as a doctor, hundreds and thousands of pregnant women, of lactating women, of children, of newborn will die in the coming weeks. To wait for 6 weeks or more to have US build this ridiculous key is to have more people dying from starvation. And we are all complicit if we don't do something. Extreme destruction, this is a report from Al Jazeera, that the destruction of habitat, civilian structure, and everything, which is illegal, is complete. And as I said, all the universities are demolished. And if you have a look at these two maps, the map to your left is a map showing the bombing of Israel, the intensity of the bombing. The redder, the more destruction. The map to the right is the habitat, the population density. And you can see that these two maps are absolutely almost 100% congruent. So they have been bombing systematically the habitat, the civilian habitat of the 2.2 million people. What should they do? Others than be in Gaza, they're not allowed to leave. So if Israel really wanted to have an armed conflict man-to-man, like we see most of the time in Ukraine against the Russian occupiers, they could just open the fence and let the Palestinian civilians leave for a time. Then they could fight. But they don't. They incarcerate 2.2 million people who have nowhere to hide, no shelter, no underground shelter, no early warning system, no nothing. And they bomb them and they starve them. How can that be in accordance with international humanitarian law? Of course it's not. Why isn't Norway protesting this? Why isn't Norway speaking up and supporting the ICG trial? Here you see from the same, this is again from the OCHA daily sheets. You see the number of partially and totally damaged homes. 392 education facilities, 11 bakeries, 123 ambulances, and this is a little bit earlier report, that's why it's 184 and not 197. But most of all, the Israelis are killing civilians as we are speaking. And I know that we have a friend from the camp breakers. Where are you, Habibi? Can you stand up? He is one of our brothers from Gaza, from Nusayrat, and he's the leader of a dancing group cooperating a lot with the Bergen Fyllingsdalen Theater, aren't you? Bergen, the Norwegian city, they said they were cooperating with you, at least. Yeah. Two of your dancers, 4-year-old Tuta and 8-year-old Rania, were killed in Nusayrat during one of the bomb attacks. Two of your students or your dancers. Yes, unfortunately. And the rest of the Palestinians in the hall? Are there more Palestinians? Can you stand up? Yalla. I think we should, no, stand up, all the Palestinians. I think we should give the Palestinians a warm hand, because they know what it means to not have somebody answer the phone when they call home to Gaza. They know what it means to see their own houses bombed. And they are the ones who really have the pain. And we should stand by you, and we should be with you all the time until this has stopped and until there is a free Palestine. So let's give them a warm hand. And make no mistake, we will support you, at least I will. So if we look at the numbers, because numbers are a little bit numbing, that's why I mentioned the two girls. This is nothing new. This is a paper we wrote for The Lancet in 2009, Erik Fosse and I, when we were in Gaza during the 2009 attack. We called it a living hell because precisely of the attacks on civilians. The Israeli government was furious when Lancet published this, because they don't want to have actually the facts seen. This is from a recent journalistic study by BBC that came the other day, just showing the number of killed women and children and men during the 2008-9, which was the one we pertained to when we wrote the book, the 2014, and now the 2023. You see the massive numbers of civilians killed. How can you justify that? Can you tell that these are actually active human shields for the resistance? Of course not. This is the politics of elimination. This is the genocidal part of the Israeli attack on Gaza and on Palestine. And this is another version of the graph showing the number of all deaths, this one, and women and children. And a state who claims that killing more than 20,000 women and children is self-defense should not be protected by any international law or any international powers, in my opinion. These are massive war crimes, and the numbers are horrifying. This is unfortunately in Norwegian, 9,000 women killed, 63 women killed every day, 37 of them are mothers. These are average numbers, 13,000 kids killed, 86 kids killed every day. 17,000 kids have lost their parents or are separated from their families. Almost 1 million children have lost their home. 1,000 children have lost one or have been amputated by the Israeli army so that one or both legs are gone. And they are now dying from avoidable thirst, hunger, and diseases. This is all from the United Nations numbers. And don't forget that in Gaza currently, there are 20,000 kids who have been born since the 7th of October. And they are small, very tiny, and very fragile to cold, to lack of water, and to lack of food, of course. 77,000 pregnant women, 60,000 lactating women, and there is between 170 and 180 deliveries every day. This is an extremely fragile group, and this is Dr. Youssef Abarish, never interviewed, never given the chance to talk from the Palestinian perspective. He's a pediatrician, he's a fierce leader, fantastic man. And he told me 2 months ago, he said, the triangle of death in Gaza now, Dr. Matz, he said, it's not the bombing. It is the combination of starvation, lack of water, and diseases. And I add hypothermia because it's winter in Gaza and the kids have poor clouds. And with precipitation and wind, they will be hypothermic, which adds to the risk of dying from disease and dehydration and starvation. And what diseases are we talking about? Well, we're talking about everyday diseases: diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, pregnancies, deliveries, mental health, and infections caused by the lack of water and the lack of hygiene. And again, I repeat what I see Jay said in January 26, they have to ensure the delivery. They are obliterating, they are stopping all aid in blatant disregard of international law, and they're pointing the finger to the whole world, actually. So this is not a question just of Gaza, this is a question for humanity. And then to wrap it up, the attacks on healthcare, all documented. I've been to hundreds of interviews, and the question I've been asked most frequently is Shifa Hospital a command and control center by Hamas? I don't know. I haven't seen any proof. Have you? Have you seen any proof? I have not. Have you seen any proof to validate the 378 attacks on Palestinian healthcare in Gaza? No. And these are, to sum up, the Israeli siege and the attacks on Gaza's hospital, the effects of that. Of course, human security, you can be killed inside the hospital. You can be killed by snipers shooting into the hospitals that we have seen both in Nasser Medical Complex. We've seen it in Al-Quds Hospital, in Shifa Hospital, and we've seen it in many other hospitals. There is no water, there is no food, there is no fuel to run the generators, there's no fuel to run the oxygen concentrators paid for by the Norwegian government and established through Norvac in all hospitals. There is no safety for the medical staff. They get killed, as we know, and there are no medical supplies. And there is no chance of evacuation of needing patients. The convoys that have been going south, many of them have been attacked, and medical staff have been arrested, abused, tortured, and even killed. So the survival probability for patients and refugees is reduced, as we see from Shifa. They attack the pre-hospital system. They attack the primary healthcare system. And according to the last report, actually, only 17% of Palestinian primary healthcare is working. 17%. So the whole primary healthcare, which looks after people with hypertension and diabetes and problems, is gone. And they attack ambulances, like you see here, this ambulance, 2 ambulances were rocketed outside Shifa Hospital and they killed the people inside. So preventive medicine, palliative care, evacuation capacity, all of that is diminished through the attacks. Again, WHO, they are documenting 304 attacks since 7th of October. And you see the numbers here. I'll come back to that briefly. It's nothing new. We have known it all the time. They did the same in 2009 and 2014. WHO made reports with maps of all the hospitals being attacked. I've been to hospitals, I've been in hospitals during attacks. It's a modus operandi of the Israeli army, and they have never, ever been held accountable. What would the West have said if the Russian army attacked 25 Ukrainian hospitals and killed 340 Ukrainian doctors and nurses? It would have been an uproar. Nothing happens when Israel does this. No protest from Norway, no formal complaints, no calling in of the Israeli ambassador to say, stop the attack on healthcare. Israel tries to claim that there is, military targets inside the hospital. Number one, they have not proven it. Number two, you are not allowed to attack militarily a combined military-civilian target, even if there might be some military advantages to that. So either way, you cannot validate, you cannot defend, and you cannot argue for these attacks. And you can go in yourself if you take a shot of this one. This is a website. This is the WHO surveillance system for attacks on healthcare. And you can put in the country or the territory here. I put in occupied Palestinian territory, which is, by the way, the formal correct term. You can put in Ukraine or Russia, whatever. And you can put in the time frame. Here is from the 7th of October until the 1st of March. And you see in OPT, 780 attacks, almost 700 killed, and almost 1,000 injured. It's all there. Jonas Gahr Støre, don't you read your sources? Where is our Minister of Health protesting this? And it's getting worse if you look at the types of attacks. This is from the same source. And here you see that it's obstruction, heavy weapons, and individual weapons that account for around 900 of such attacks in 5 months. Direct attacks on hospitals and ambulances and medical workers and primary healthcare clinics. So don't tell me you didn't know. And don't tell me there was any justification for this. Because the good people in the hospitals, the volunteers, the medical students, the nursing students, the doctors, the nurses, they are sacrificing their lives. And we haven't had one Israeli medical worker killed. We haven't had one attack on an Israeli medical institution. What would the world have said if Jewish children were starved to death by an enemy who encircled and besieged a village or a city in Israel and cut the water and the electricity and medical supplies and bombed it and starved them? How many Jewish children should die from starvation before the world would react? We know the number. 1, 0. How many hospitals should the Palestinians attack until there would have been whatever reactions? We know it. So this is the double standard. This is the blatant hypocrisy of international humanitarian law, the disregard from the West, and the application of double standards. So let me finish with this from Nasser Medical Complex that was besieged for 2 weeks. Everything was cut. They received loads of new patients. They worked tirelessly night and day. We have a number of consulting groups with particularly Arab-speaking doctors who consult with these heroes and give them advice when they have cases they're not specialized in treating. And they keep going and they keep going. And then they invaded the hospital. And I think this picture is so telling. The dignified Palestinian hospital director, Dr. Atef Al-Hot, who is really talking straight in the eyes to the Israeli commander in this disgraceful occupation of the hospital. Hospitals are temples of mercy, compassion, and care. Hospitals are like churches. It's where we praise life. Hospitals are therefore protected. Israel is getting away with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of attacks on healthcare without even claiming that the patients are human shields. They just claim this vague, it's a military command center, which they have not proven at all. I have nothing left but my grief, a lifeless body walking. This is what Israel has done with its supporters, says my friend, Dr. Umar al-Najjar, who is one of the brave doctors in the Gaza Strip. And you see here from the same report, now it's close to 400 health workers killed and 124 journalists. So my friends, everything is known. It's all documented, but Israeli impunity prevails. Israeli impunity is one of the single most important moral and political problems of our time, because this fuels the whole global South in their anger towards the West and their right critique of our double standards, and it fuels a massive disregard for human value, for international humanitarian law, and for the values that we all keep so sacred. So we need, as Coline says, we need a rehumanization of current international humanitarian law. Really, 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 it's badly needed. We cannot go on like this. If Israel and the United States and the responsible EU governments gets away with this Holocaust in Gaza, this undoubtedly ethnic cleansing and maybe genocide, what will the future be for our kids? Who is next? Is it Lebanon? Is it Turkey? Is it Syria? Is it Jordan? Is it Norway? If this is the new standard for warfare, if this is the new standard for disregard for international law and the value of a human life, and don't forget, what you're doing now is what you would have done during Holocaust. And what you're not doing now is what you would not have done during Holocaust. I don't want to see one single civilian Jew killed. And I don't want to see hundreds of thousands of Palestinian women, children, men, elders, maimed, starved, and killed by the Israeli colonial occupation forces. So shukran kthir. I salute the sumud of the Palestinian people. I think we have to do more at the university, and don't forget what Nelson Mandela said: no power on earth can stop an oppressed people determined to win their freedom. And he also said that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people. And I concur to that. Professor Ilan Pappé, the British historian, himself a Jew, he said the other day, Israel is a settler colonial project that is nearing its end. As colonial projects reach their final phase, become more brutal and more ruthless. I have seen from my experience in Gaza that when there is a ceasefire, agreed, maybe in 24 hours, they always increase the brutality of the attacks the last 24 hours, as if it's a sort of a spasm, a cataclysm that they have to do more killing. I don't know why. But I think Ilan Pappé is pointing to one of the important points. Israel has lost, Palestine has won. It will take time, it will be painful, but it will be for sure freedom for the Palestinian people one day. Shukran kthir, and thank you very much.
Shukran much for this very insightful presentation. And I think it's very important that you reminded that we live in a society of double standards, but indeed there is people that they are showing us that it's not only about being observers on what is going on. We have approximately 13 minutes left until the end of the panel, and you are more than welcome to bring some questions to the presenters. I would kindly ask you to come on the stage or sit if you wish.
Do you want us? Okay.
If it's, yeah, as you prefer. But we can take questions both from online and in the room.
After you, lady.
Do we have any questions, hands in the room or comments? I don't see any reactions at the moment. Sophie, what about online? Nothing yet. Then maybe I could see two of the hands or. Maybe take a minute.
I think you need the microphone
just to make
have
sure
it
people can listen to you.
recorded.
Yes.
You have turned on yours? Oh, it's not on. Why don't you use this? Okay.
Yeah.
Hello? Yes, now I'm on. So my name is Tove Wulf-Nielsen. I am a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Law, and I'm doing a doctoral thesis within international criminal law. I've been listening to this very interesting speeches from Gilbert. And also, I'm sorry, I forgot her name. Yeah, Coline. Yes, it was really interesting listening to you both. So my question is regarding the criticism against Norway for what we have not done and what we should do. About a month ago, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had their highest representative speaking about the role in Norway, or what we did in our position as the current member of United Nations Security Council. I'm speaking about Barth Eide, of course, that he was invited from the university to talk about basically the situation in the northern area, but also the situation on the Gaza Strip and the Ukraine-Russian conflict. But what I'm missing is a more balanced picture of what Norway is actually doing. According to Barth Eide, Norway is actually doing a lot. We are speaking up in every time we have the chance in the United Nations Security Council meetings. We are speaking up due to our relationship with Israel. And we are also speaking up as officially not at all recognizing the horrendous acts from Israel towards the Palestinian population, which is about what we can talk about almost, but we have to talk about it. So I'm just asking for isn't it a more balanced picture in this? I mean, Norway was a leading country when it comes to the Oslo Agreement in the 1990s. And we have also tried to make the very controversial decision from the ICJ, which was clearly said that Israel had to do something towards the Palestinian situation, and gave them a concrete task to come back to them and speak up what they actually had done so far. So I don't think there anyone here in this room who can disagree that what is going on in the Middle East now is terrible. But to ask more directly, what do you mean? What do you mean concrete? What do you mean directly that we should do? Because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the representative says, we are doing a lot. We're doing as much as we can. We're trying to influence USA's role in this. We try to influence in the United Nations Security Council. We try to influence because we have ratified ICJ, and we are doing everything we can in order to make this a dialogue. So I just want you to say something what you mean that we should have done more than
Okay.
yeah.
Want to start?
I have little knowledge about Norway's position, I must say, so I think you should go.
I don't think we need more speaking and talking and speaking up. We need action. We need concrete political action. And Norway is a member of NATO. Israel has a position in NATO. Norway is the leechdog of US foreign policy. We are having nuclear submarine base across the strait here, which nobody wants. Norway can't do anything in the foreign policy picture without being online. So that's why I totally disagree with you that this speaking up is enough. Norway has not even supported the ICJ case raised by South Africa. Not the last time I checked. On the day that this Russian opposition leader, Novotny, what his name was, when he died, he might have been killed, but he died. On that day, what did Barth Eide do? He called the Russian ambassador in to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. When did he call the Israeli Minister of Foreign, the Israeli ambassador to the Minister of Foreign Affairs? Never. Isn't that pretty easy to do? Or to even do as South Africa has done, close down the office, the embassy. I can see the argument that we need dialogue, but what has this dialogue given the Palestinians? Nothing. And when you argue about the Oslo Treaty, that is conceived, that is understood by the Palestinians. They can speak for themselves. But that's a total trap. That's a betrayal. That's a stab in the back for the Palestinians. The Oslo Treaty has never done anything good for the Palestinian people. And Israel has not followed up on one single of their commitments in the Oslo Treaty. And that's part of the reason why we have the situation today. So what can Norway do? Number one, they can call the ambassador in and say, stop the killing of civilians, stop the attacks on hospitals. We will call you again if you don't. Number two, they could have joined in with Jordan and other countries in being offensive and active in providing relief. When Jordan did the first airdrops, I don't agree with the airdrops, but it was an important breach of the siege. They did that already in November. As the first nation at state level, we were breaking the siege. Norway hasn't done anything to break the siege, nothing. They could pull out all the investments from the Norwegian pension fund easily. Now I hear that my good friend Roger, who is now the head of Norwegian People's Aid, is arguing that we should maybe pull out the investments in illegal colonies, also called settlements. That's not enough. We should pull out all the billions that we have in stocks in Israel. And we should actually be much more active in supporting all the initiatives coming from the Global South, the states in the Global South. I appreciate, I know Espen, I know Jonas, I appreciate that they think that the talking way is the right way. I don't see any results. I know that Israel is furious with Norway because they did not agree to call Hamas a terrorist organization. I know they're furious that they stepped up and did not cut the funding to UNRWA. I know Israel is furious because actually Norway increased the financial support for humanitarian help to Palestine. And they're furious because Jonas actually called for an end to the siege. That's good, but it's not enough. It's not enough. In 2009, the Minister of Finance in Norway, Kristin Halvorsen, she was leading the big demonstrations in Oslo against the attack on Gaza in 2009. Have you seen any of the ministers from the government taking part in one single popular demonstration? No, they're all hiding and they're going to this talking. So with all due respect, I don't think we do enough. And I think we have to push the government by being active in demonstrations, by being active and demanding from our government more concrete action. And one of the arguments from Espen Barth Eide is that when the call for boycott, sanctions, and divestment comes, he says, we cannot go alone. Nobody else in Europe, no other state in Europe is calling for BDS or for sanctions of Israel. Why is that so difficult to go alone? Gro Harlem Brundtland was the first Western government leader when she was prime minister to initiate boycott of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And she said, sometimes you have to start. Have they all forgotten that? So my conclusion is they don't do enough. They speak, yes, but that's not enough. We need more direct action. And the first thing we could do was to boycott Israel and to divest all Norwegian stocks in Israel. That would be a good start.
Thank you. And we can take one last question from online, perhaps. Sophie, have you found something?
Yeah, so related to this question of the boycott campaign, there's a question from online, and how can we as UIT staff and students put more effective concrete pressure on UIT to boycott Israel or other actions?
Well, I guess your insight into the little village of Tromsø on political issues is not maybe that good. I'd like to remind the audience and also the university, it's a brilliant question, that Tromsø municipality, Tromsø kommune, actually has a valid decision by the Tromsø Municipality Council to boycott any goods or services that comes from illegal Palestinian colonies. We already did that, I think it's 10 years ago. So we have an active boycott decision in this municipality. Why could not the University of Tromsø say, we will boycott Israeli state universities, not individuals, but state institutions who are supporting the occupation and the attacks? And there is plenty to take of. So I think the university, the Arctic University of Norway, could do that as a first thing, join the other universities who are now dismantling and stopping cooperation agreements with Israeli institutions. We could invite Palestinian scholars. We could make a program to support Palestinian students in different faculties because they have now bombed all the universities in Gaza. So we could say, we open our doors for you. We could argue with Norwegian immigration authorities that we should take 100 students from Gaza, medical students, pharmacy students, law students, whatever, to give them an international possibility to educate here. And we could follow the money. We could find out if the University of Tromsø has any connections to any Israeli allied companies, businesses, or influential organizations. So if you want me to make the list longer, just call me. There's plenty to do, but I think we should start with saying we want academic freedom. And has the university said anything about the fact that the occupation army has bombed all the universities in Gaza? They haven't said a fucking word. So get up and get dressed and do your job and be part of this world. That was my answer, yes.
Thank you.
Actually, somebody else can also mention this. I just wanted to point out, related to that question, that there is a petition, a signature petition for employees and students at UIT demanding all of these things that Mats just mentioned. In addition to that, there's an external petition for everybody in Tromsø, or everybody, I think, to demand that UIT take more action. What I personally have done, I have written to my union demanding for them to take action. I have complained to my supervisors and other employees that they haven't provided any support measures like they did with Ukraine. All of these initiatives we have at the university are organized by us. There has been absolutely no initiatives from the university with seminars, informational events, nothing. So there are several initiatives going, but I think the more we email them, the more we demand from all directions, the better, because what they're doing right now is just hoping that it's all going to go away and that we're going to stop hassling them. But of course, we're not going to do that.
Can I have a last comment? First of all, I want to thank the international students, because you are actually a very active driving force at the university and in the solidarity work. And we've seen that all over Norway, that not only Palestinian people living in Norway, but students from the global south are a much more powerful force because we are drowning in the butter eye, as we say. So we need the push from you to get more active. So thank you. Number two, why can't we demand that the University of Tromsø is flying the Palestinian flag? Why can't we do that? Why can't didn't we flag with the Ukrainian flag? I think we did. Why should we not flag with the Palestinian flag? Maybe one day? Maybe we should make one Solidarity Day with Gaza and West Bank for the university and have some open seminars and workshops. Easy peasy. I was in Turkey 2 weeks ago. Huge university symposium in one of the biggest universities in Istanbul. Fantastic lineup of international researchers, 2 days, big media outlet, everything. So where is UIT when it comes to the world situation? And then I have a question for you, finally. What do you think will be the impact of the current trial in ICJ when it comes to your conclusion in your thesis, namely that we have to redefine and restore the validity of protection of civilians in international human? Do you see any? Do you see light or do you see more darkness?
Well, that's a very good question. First, we don't know if they will actually do that and restore the protection of civilians, and it will probably be in years. And hopefully by then, what's happening right now will be over. But to be honest, for now, I see more darkness because over the last 2 decades, this narrative about human shields has not only been used in Israel and Palestine, it has been used in Sri Lanka and in many other places. It has been used in Ukraine as well. And it seems more like it's multiplying and it's not being countered from anywhere. And I'm not sure it's going to be treated in the current case at the ICJ.
I agree with you. And I think this issue about defining civilian populations as human shield in densely populated area is actually a forecast of what we will see for the coming decades, where much of the uprising in the global south will take part in the big metropoles, because the people from the countryside are migrating into the big cities. You have favelas, you have slum, you have millions of people in very densely populated area. And I know that Israelis and US military analysts and experts are using Gaza as a test case for urban warfare in densely populated areas. How long can you push the population because they crack and go against the leadership, for example? How much starvation can you use before the international community says stop? How can you use the tiny, small butterfly drones to fly in the windows and kill people in their beds? All of these things are tested out in Gaza because for the next 2 centuries and 2 decennia, I think many military analysts think that the armed struggle between the powers and the uprising people will be exactly the scenario that we see in Gaza now. So then this question, the legality or illegality of defining a whole civilian population as a human shield is very important. And I think that we also need to discuss more and redefine the role of the popular resistance in waging armed resistance against colonial powers. Because at the end of the day, it is the popular resistance that is the winning recipe for the anti-colonial struggle, like we saw in Vietnam, like we saw in many of the African countries and South American countries. People's war is much more than just the armed struggle. So I think this work that you're doing is so important. Thank you.
So before closing, we took a very last question from the audience. So if you are willing to stay a few minutes longer, it would be wonderful. And Abed, please.
It's a highlight. Maybe as a Palestinian who lived there, maybe he has more insight thinking than any other people. When we talk about Israeli using human shield, we say that Palestinian that live in Gaza. But I think also they use human shield in a converse way, in a West Bank, by pushing them civilians to area and then said, okay, we need to protect these people and then occupied more people. And we are saying about settlers. If we follow the statistic, we will see that in last 20 years, I think 63 of West Bank have been occupied in this excuse. I don't know if I can say it human right, but I wanted to be more aware if that can be a human shield or not in a converse way. That means she used Palestinian to kill them as a human right, and also she used the land by using her civilian. Even I don't believe that settlers are a civilian. Thank you.
It's for you.
Well, I would need to look at this case specifically, but I know that Israel has a history of using human shields, and their strategy was specifically in the year 2000 of using Palestinians and send them inside homes that they wanted to target before them to see what was the situation inside. And I would need to check what you're talking about specifically.
Okay, don't forget, people, be active. There are lots of things you can do. And ask yourself every morning, what would you have done during Holocaust? Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being with us today. And we hope, and mostly our two presenters,
Very nice.
they deserve a huge applause for closing.
You might remember.
And we look forward to seeing you again next month in the following seminar. Just get in touch, get our brochures, join the demos, be active. Thank you.
If you want to connect, that's my